Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. Today we will follow up on our discussion on manuscripts. As I have been repeating time and again in this in my lectures, the reason why we are going through the history of various kinds of textual production is that we want to understand how technological changes have affected histories of or processes of production of texts and distribution and understanding of texts, because we are currently going through a similar change or moving towards digital media. So, we want to look closely at various instances of these changes and the kind of large sweeping changes that these changes would have brought about at various instances in history. We had in one of our previous lectures looked at the history of orality in the Western context, and then we paid some attention to the tradition of Dastan Goi specifically, which is was a practice of oral transmission, oral narratives within the subcontinental context. In our previous lecture, we looked at very closely at manuscript production, but we did so primarily in a European context, in a Western European context. While discussing manuscript production within a Western European context, I did also suggest that it was not something that was happening only in Western Europe. Many of these changes were happening through contact with other parts of the world, primarily with Central Asia, the Middle East, Egypt, China. So, paper comes in from China, some of the manuscript traditions come in from Central Asia, papyrus came in from Egypt, ink comes from some of the inks material to produce the ink comes in from Afghanistan and various other places. So, trade was very important, contact with the outside with the rest of the world was very important in the development. These contacts also affected other parts of the world and including the subcontinent. So, today we will look a little closely at what was happening within the context of manuscript production within the Indian subcontinent. Of course, this is a very vast field and I will just give you a very short introduction to this. The principal aim of this introduction is not to go into the factual processes of how what kind of manuscripts are there, who produced this manuscript, who were the principal authors, who were the patrons. These are not this is not what interests us in this particular course. What is of interest for us is to understand the technological processes through which were necessary for textual production to take place. And therefore, the important point really is that we must have fathom the idea that textual production has a certain it is not merely that the author thinks and writes. There are many steps towards textual production, and the specific steps of textual production and in the context in which they are circulated and received determine the way the text actually is constructed or written. The words themselves are constructed and written, and this is something that we will try to understand as we go through this course. Now, The origins of writing in India are a matter of dispute. Of course, this would be the case, and this is of course true also of in any other context. It is not only true of India, but because what we are talking about is a history of very early times, thousands of years ago, and very little evidence actually is available to us. As I have mentioned earlier, that records would primarily be oral records. I mean, they were not oral, it is an oxymoron. Oral is not a record because it does not, it is ephemeral, it does not last, and therefore, we do not have any evidence. What we try to gather from there is any remnant of any tales, any images that may have been produced which talks about textual production, or from within the narratives that are still extant, some of them written down hundreds of years later, after hundreds of years of circulation. They may carry traces of contemporary events which will help us date those narratives. But unlike manuscript records, oral records are very difficult to actually trace and also place them within a chronological order. So, what I am going to talk about in terms of the origins of writing and the movement from orality to chirographic traditions within India, within the Indian subcontinent. We need to talk about a subcontinental context, because obviously the modern day India, the political India is a very recent phenomena. This subcontinent has hundreds of years of history of various empires, various civilizations, and which have interbred and intermingled and interconnected for hundreds and thousands of years. So, we will talk about a subcontinental context rather than specifically the political India. One point that we need to note here, which would be true of any society, is that in a primarily oral society before the coming of written texts, even learned people would be illiterate. Even the elite within the society would be illiterate, because literacy really means that you know the alphabet, you are able to read or write, and you are able to create or receive texts. But in a world which is oral, there is no need for this kind of literacy. So, people may be very learned, but they would be learned through oral means, through the embodiment of knowledge rather than the textualization of knowledge. So, therefore, we should not measure oral the knowledge basis of oral societies on the basis of literacy. In an oral society, in a predominantly oral society, illiterates are not ignorant. If you look at history, many of the great emperors would have been illiterate, so to say. I mean, many of the poets would have not written their own poetry, they would have used scribes to do that. So, illiteracy is not a mark of ignorance. I would argue even today many people who are very knowledgeable, extremely wise, may still be illiterate. So, I think that is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, the earliest examples of writing within the Indian subcontinent surely is that of the Indus Valley civilization, where you have the seals in which there are markings. That was at around one can place them at around 2600 to 1900 before the Common Era, right. That was the kind of period in which these seals were found. Now, these were largely one would say principally for purposes of record keeping, of trade, and economic in nature. They would not have been used to tell stories in all probability. And then the next real significant instance of writing is were the Ashokan pillars, which were created round about 250 years before the Common Era, before the year 0. So, and in between there were Vedic writings before the onset of Buddhism. So, you understand the Ashokan pillars were created clearly after the onset of Buddhism, but before the onset of Buddhism also there were Vedic writings which were available, and most probably the Vedic script that was used was a Brahmi script. All right. Very, very rare documents pass on to us. The manuscripts do not last very long, and so a lot of this it takes a lot of archaeological and expert kind of work to be able to trace and time these documents. But you must understand, when we say that there were Vedic instances of Vedic writing, does not mean that it was largely a chirographic society, because the culture was largely oral. Visitors to India, to the subcontinent, who came in from other countries and maintained records, other countries which did actually had the practice of writing before writing originated in India or became prevalent in India, noted that in the courts and legal proceedings were largely oral. Testimonies would largely be oral. That would be true. We have evidence of it till about 300 years before the Common Era. Now, it does not mean there was an absence of writing. It was that writing was primarily restricted to other domains like trade, but in legal proceedings or artistic creation, literary creation, you did not have the use of writing. So, the date that I just discussed was 300 years before the Common Era, and however, some as I said, there is a great dispute over when exactly writing did commence. We really do not know. Some experts contest this and claim that there is evidence of codification in the Rig Veda, which starts emerging at around 1200 years before the Common Era. Now, so that's a hiatus of about 900 years. Now, the reason why other sort of historians and scholars have questioned this dating up to 1200 years is because that codification is possible even without the coming of writing. Now, one of the points that we would have figured out from our earlier lectures is that it is with the coming of writing, when the written text actually moves away from the speaker, from the speech immediate speech community, that you have the need for grammar, the codification, right. However, it is possible to argue that it is this kind of codified techniques could be possible also within oral practices. It varies from context to context. Now, it would be like this. For example, if you can think of it in your own mind, that what is it that we recall easily? How many songs, popular songs, do you remember? The lines of how many popular songs do you remember? May not be fully, but a large extent that you keep maybe humming to yourself or sing among friends and gatherings. And how many prose passages do you actually remember, right? Because it is, so this shows that poetry, verse is actually codified together in the form of the rhyme and the rhythm, and it becomes easier to remember. So, there is a certain degree of codification which is possible within the even within oral practices, and so therefore, codification though becomes much more regimented, much more stringent in the written era, it does not mean that codification itself would be something that is an evidence of a written tradition. So, if there is been a codification of the Rig Veda at around 1200 years before the Common Era, does not mean that it is evidence of a literate society. So, these disputes are there. Some of the important implications of this is that, if we look at certain passages and they talk about instances, many of these passages are also talking about practical life, things that are happening around, they have contemporary references. So, some of them carry these evidence of the fact that if someone who is reciting a certain passage and forgets a certain part of the passage, then what would they do? They are advised within that particular text to actually then start reciting something similar, but maybe a different text. They are not advised to immediately refer to the written text and learn it by heart and then recite it again, as one would do in a literate society. Or another suggestion is that if monks did forget a certain passage or a certain tract, they would then have to travel to a greater scholar and undertake a process of learning of that tract before they participate in recitation once again. As I have noted earlier, that in an oral society it is important to constantly keep reciting and repeating in order to keep the text in circulation. It is only by recitation that the text remains in circulation, because that is how the human brain works. The more you keep practicing, more you keep revising and recalling, you will be able to remember a whole lot more. The moment there is no revision, no repetition, that particular knowledge is within a danger of getting lost. With writing, of course, the need for repetition or the need for revision is reduced. So you would recall that in some of the religious practices, people would have to recite a certain holy text or a set of holy verses every single day, maybe more than once a day. That is a practice to ensure that that text actually keeps getting perpetuated and keeps remaining in circulation. Within the subcontinent, evidence of writing really started gaining traction, started increasing in evidence within the first 500 years of the Common Era. So, and writing took various forms. There would be inscription on rocks, inscription on copper plates, tamrapatra, and palm leaf manuscripts. Palm leaf manuscripts could have been of various kinds, or there would be the bhurjapatra or the birch bark manuscript, primarily found in the Himalayan region, both in Kashmir as well as in Assam. And paper really comes into being only by about the 14th and 15th centuries from Central Asia, through the various rulers who came in from Central Asia, or traders and other scholars. There is also the sanchipat, the bark of the agaru tree, primarily predominantly in Assam. This would be used. Across the Himalayas in China, they would use bamboo to write on, which was not so much of a practice in India. In India, they did use bamboo, but only as a pen or a writing equipment. Palm leaf were of various kinds. There was the Palmyra palm or the tari gach, which produced the written sheet, which is the kharatal. It would also be called the tali. The name of the leaf of the plant was the Borosus flabellifera, and the other leaf that was used, other palm tree that was used, the corypha leaf or the talipat. Now, these were of different sizes. The Palmyra was 1.5 to 1 3/4 inches wide, whereas the talipat is 1 3/4 to about 3 inches wide. It is wider. Since we find that manuscripts under 1.75 inches, that is 1 3/4 inches, are very uncommon. So, obviously, one can assume that it is the corypha leaf which is most prevalent, but various parts of the country use various kinds of leaves. Now, these also the Palmyra is more prone to insect attack, corypha is less prone to insect attack. So, corypha is the one that is more widespread, more favorite among scribes. Now, once the leaf is cut, the midleaf is removed. The leaf comes in a kind of a star sort of pattern. Each of the branches, the midleaf is removed. The leaves are boiled and dried multiple times to harden. This is a certain process, as we saw within even in Western Europe. We saw how the parchment making process was a certain laborious process which was there. Similarly, here the preparation of the writing surface takes a certain amount of time. Various kinds of techniques were developed in various parts of the world. We know that in Egypt, when they prepared papyrus, they would take papyrus, the leaves, and then they will soak them in water and then put them across in a crisscross pattern. You can check online sources. These are very easily available pieces of knowledge. Who put it in a crisscross fashion and beat them so that they merge into a larger piece. But here we find that most of these the palm leaf documents are elongated, they are long pieces. We talked about the shape of paper in the previous lecture. The fact that the shape of paper takes from the shape of parchment and is handed down in tradition. So, when the Europeans come into our country, the shape of the writing material changes, whereas traditionally within India, because of the use of palm leaf as a writing surface, the shape of the writing surface was very different from the one that we are used to today. The shape that paper really takes. Paper can really be cut and put across. Can be cut into any shape that you want, but it is merely a tradition that allows. And also the other point is that within the codexes, the predominant technique is to open it across from right to left, whereas within the palm leaf manuscripts they would open from bottom to the top. Of course, we know in various Arabic and Central Asian documents they would open from left to right instead of right to left. So, these are various kinds of traditions which are there, which various kinds of conventions. Certainly, the history of colonialism plays a very important role in universalizing the European tradition. But so therefore, even in the creation, in the technology behind the production of texts, a certain cultural conventional instances play a very important role. So, as I was talking about the preparation of these the palm leaf for writing, the midleaf is removed, it is cut with a sharp knife, and the leaves are boiled and dried multiple times to harden. They are dried in the shed and not in the sun, because the heat of the sun, if it is too much, could actually cause the palm leaf to shrivel. In some parts of the country, the palm leaves could be kept under mud for a longish period of time and then dried. Various traditions are there. They would be smoothened, the surface needed to be smoothened. They would use a kind of a stone, maybe pumice stone, to smoothen it. Then the leaf would be cut to the certain size. All the leaves would be cut to a standard size. As I said, in Assam they use the sanchi bark, the bark of the tree, which would again be dried in the sun for about 10 days, and both surfaces would have to be cleaned. The outer surface needed to be shaved off to remove the outer darker layer, and then they are smoothened and polished and made ready for writing and painting. Right now, colors for writing would be prepared by the scribes, and these colors are by and large similar to the kinds that was there in the European context, because these colors would have a certain, the material that is used for these colors would be something that is part of the trade network, and they would be very expensive. The ink would be very expensive. Mostly black would be used for writing, yellow and red for painting, decoration. Gold and silver was primarily used for the borders. They would be used for the more sort of special document that is prepared, the manuscript that could be prepared. Now, to put these leaves together, keep these leaves together, holes would be made with a stylus in the middle of the palm leaf, and a cord would be passed through these holes and they would be tied together. The palm leaf sheets would be bound between two strips of wood, and there could be up to 100 leaves in one set, and they would be bound between the two woods and then tied. That cord would be tied across the entire thing and kept together, and they would also be wrapped with cloth. Now, and it is only then that the writing really starts, after this entire process, there's a lot of also use of a lot of organic repellents to keep insects and worms away from the sheets, and because there could be termite eaten. Most of the times what would happen is these manuscripts would not last very long. They will maximum last for about 200 years, which is quite long. I mean, how many books do last for 200 years? They get moth eaten. So, we do understand that these are organic materials, and therefore, manuscripts which are older than, let us say, 400 or 500 years would be very rare manuscripts. They rarely would survive. They would also be not complete manuscripts. Some parts of it may have survived, the others have to be deciphered. The tradition would be that almost, so every family would have their own manuscripts, or there would be very wealthy families, or maybe royal families, or maybe some monasteries would have their own manuscripts. And when a manuscript really reaches its towards the end of its life, someone, the scholar, the scribe, actually makes a new copy of it, a fresh copy of it. So, that is the tradition through which these manuscripts continue to survive, not that it is produced once and it remains, but it is constantly reproduced again and again, and that is how the manuscript really gets handed down. Now, you would imagine that while it is getting copied and rewritten, there are various kinds of interpolations, interjections, changes, contemporary references, styles of writing, handwriting, various kinds of things would undergo a change. So, though a story, a particular narrative, or a particular piece of spiritual set of doctrines could be noted down, which could be passed down for generations, for hundreds and thousands of years, but the physical sort of representation of it, the manuscript that we are talking about, that would not be really very old. Now, what kind of writing implements we use? Primarily, they would use a stylus. The stylus was also used to make the hole in the manuscript to pass the cord. They would also use pens and brushes. Primarily, reed pens would be used, which would be made of bamboo or other kinds of sticks, and the metal stylus would be used to also write on the palm leaf, primarily in southern India, and this is a very interesting process. The stylus would really be held either like this, or it could be held with, if a hole has to be made, a lot more pressure has to be put with the thumb on the top, and the little finger will go inside in order to hold it together. So, various kinds of techniques, but in order to write, they could write with the entire fist in place, and they would usually take the piece of paper within the hand, hold it like this, and keep inscribing. Right. Very interesting that when we are writing on paper, it is the hand that moves, the paper remains stationary. So, even if I am writing on the board at the back, I mean, it is the hand which would be moving and not the writing surface, but on the palm leaf, it is actually the writing surface that moves. As the scribe holds this the stylus at the same place, and slowly with his thumb and forefinger keep moving the palm leaf from one end to another, right. And this is also true of medieval scrolls. The writing would happen at the same place, but the scroll will keep on scrolling from one side to another, and the writing surface being long, this is a very convenient thing to do. And what was happening with the sharp stylus really is that it actually creates a groove on the surface. it creates a certain groove on the surface, and this there is no mark. After this, they would take a paste of carbon, some kind of soot or that ink, and rub it over these grooves, and then the excess carbon will be wiped off, that will leave a black marking of the entire written space, right. So, that is a very interesting form of the way in which most palm leaf documents. Of course, there were other forms, various Indian subcontinent is a very large geography, various other kinds of this, the way modern kind of writing, that is with a reed pen would also be used. A bamboo pen would be prepared first, sharpened, and dipped in ink, and writing would also happen, calligraphy would happen, manuscript would be prepared. So, there are various multiple kinds of techniques which were used for these manuscript writing, and the scribe had to learn this process. It was not something that any writing process is not very natural, though we do learn the use of pencil and pen in very early on in our childhood. These are certain techniques which people have to gather, people have to learn, without which they are not able to use them. All right. Important point to note here is that there were no gaps between the words. Usually the letters were joined, because the gaps between the words becomes a much later modern innovation. It was not there in the very early days. A point to be noted, as I said, is that these manuscripts did not last very long. In the humid climate, the survival rate of manuscripts would be very little. In fact, most palm leaves did originate from the southern part of India. Interestingly, it is in the southern part of India that you have a more humid climate, the coastal regions, but and the manuscripts would survive a lot lesser. But if you move towards a drier climate, more towards northern India, or even if you move towards Central Asia, where these palm leaf writing surfaces could travel before the manuscript is created there. It is almost like supply of raw paper, and so this is supply of these palm leaf surfaces would be there through the trade routes. Documents produced in Central Asia, documents produced within the drier climate of northern India survive a lot more than they would survive in southern India. And also another important point to be noted is that these writing processes, they were time consuming, they required leisure. So, people who are engaged in manual labor would not be able to do it. Certainly, literacy was a matter of the elite, it was socially stratified, but also so therefore it required patronage. It could be require the patronage of royal families who would fund various centers of education, various stalls, gurukuls, and various other kind of maybe even centers of learning, where these manuscript productions would take place. But even though manuscripts did exist, the culture still remained largely a oral one, in which text would be used to commit to memory. The manuscripts would not be used, would not be sort of in kind of daily use, because monks, priests and learned people would know these lines, the text by heart. They would be committed to memory, and they would keep on reciting it and committing it to memory. So, because we are still talking about a largely oral sort of oral universe, and that is the kind of universe that it is. We will, through this course, we will keep on returning to this theme of keep on returning to this theme of what happens within manuscript and print and textual circulation within the Indian subcontinent, to keep a note of what changes were happening within the place which is around us, the Indian subcontinent. However, we must understand that many of the issues that we are going to which concern us are actually resultant of a modern Western civilization, and therefore, the focus of this course will continue to be to understand Western processes a whole lot more, and we will see how they get translated within the subcontinent from time to time. Thank you.